My next guest has introduced a bill that appears to have gained an enormous amount of momentum toward passage and therefore some opposition from Republicans as well. It is the first such bill to come this far that would actually expand Social Security benefits and make it fiscally sound for what I would describe as the foreseeable future. Representative John Larson has been spearheading the Social Security 2100 Act and has been doing really quite remarkably well at it, I have to say. And with that, Representative Larson, first of all, I should say he represents Connecticut's first congressional district, which includes Hartford, the state capital, and he is a Democrat, former chairman of the House Democratic Caucus. So first of all, Representative John Larson, thanks so much for coming on the program.
Richard, happy to be here with you.
Well, we're delighted to have you. And I was mentioning a little bit before we went on the air, but just to elaborate, some of my listeners know that before I became the troublemaker and agitator I am today, I guess, but I actually used to work in the insurance business and health insurance, workers' comp, risk management, ran a lot of numbers, did a lot of proposals in my time. And when I heard the story of how you went around selling the Social Security 2100 Act to other members of Congress for their support, the first thought that came into my mind, when all I knew, really, the most I knew about you was your political background, was this person had to be a broker because he knows how to pitch. And it turns out I was right, wasn't I?
You were absolutely right. As we were discussing before, I was both a teacher first, and then I was an insurance agent and broker, and ended up owning my own agency. And so very familiar with the insurance. And as you probably know and understand, Hartford is generally regarded still as one of the insurance centers and used to be called the insurance capital of the country.
I remember coming up there for many a meeting. In fact, I even ran a company in Connecticut at one point in my life, and used to come to Hartford all the time to sell its services. So it's an interesting world out there. And one of the things that you've done is, there's a lot of talk, as you know, Representative Larson on the left, about and I'm part of some of that talk, just to be clear,
Sure.
that maybe we worry too much about pay-fors compared to the other side. They go out, they give 1.5 trillion or 2 trillion in tax breaks, and they don't think twice about a pay-for. But setting all that aside for a second, right now, under the current system, Social Security is required to be paid by its own source, and that's the payroll tax, and we have to project out its actuarial balance going forward 75 years. But to be clear, your proposal expands Social Security benefits and obeys all those rules at the same time, right?
That is correct. And as you know, Richard, the last time we did anything significant with regard to Social Security was 1983. That's 36 years ago. And Ronald Reagan was president, and Tip O'Neill was Speaker of the House. And the last time there's been any enhancement to the program was almost 50 years ago. So here's the deal. What I ask people, and in any audience that I'm in, I'd say, by the way, since this is not an entitlement, as some have called it, but actually an insurance plan, easily verifiable by everyone looking at their pay stub, where it says FICA, which, as you know, stands for Federal Insurance Contribution. Whose? Theirs. And the public knows this. They're keenly aware of this fact. And then I ask them, by the way, have any of your insurance premiums gone up since 1983? And there's usually a large chuckle from the audience, but certainly a lot of nodding of the heads. And so what we've said in the vision of Roosevelt was this was never intended to be any kind of an entitlement. It's an earned benefit that people contribute to. And Congress's responsibility is to make sure that it's actuarially sound. And the last time they took any significant step was 36 years ago. We're long overdue. And had they indexed the program, and something you're familiar with back then, we wouldn't even be having this conversation because the program would continue to pay for itself. So we say we are going to increase the contribution by 1%, but phase that in over 25 years, again, taking place of the indexing that should have happened back in 1983. And so what that does is for a person making $50,000 a year means that they would be paying 50 cents a week to make sure that, as actuaries say, that Social Security is sustainably solvent. That means beyond 75 years, as the law requires, and also enhance it at the same time so that there's a basic increase across the board of 2% for all recipients to make sure that no one can retire into poverty, as is the case for so many women and people of color, still close to 5 million in this country currently, who have paid their quarters in, but because of their because they were females and were caregivers and were at home to provide for their children and don't have as many quarters in, but have the requirement, and also because of the inequity. They were making 80 cents if they were white women for every dollar their male counterpart was,
Right.
56 cents if you were black, and 43 cents if you were Hispanic. And so that, as John Lewis likes to remind me, is becoming the civil rights movement of the day because of the inequity and, of course, the changing demographic and population of our entire country.
So we've got a bill here that for most people, I would say 99.5.6% of the population, this bill at most will ask them for pennies a week, small change a week over a long, and that kicks in over a long period of time, if I understand you correctly, and in return, we have a way of assuring that people, particularly the victims of the kinds of discrimination you described, do not spend their retirement years or disabled time in poverty. That helps others as well by strengthening the benefits overall, and does it without violating the rules of financial balance or paying as you go that should satisfy the most conservative in the world. Have I fairly summarized what you're saying?
Yes, and we do also, we make sure that we have a COLA, something that the AARP has been arguing for a long time, a COLA that we call it CPI-E, E standing for the elderly, but actually reflects the actual cost that the elderly will incur. Whether it's heating and cooling your home, whether it's the groceries that you pick up in the store, whether it's the doctor visits, the pharmaceuticals, the physical therapy, those should be the factors that are brought into this. And for many, as you know, many times the current COLA formula, people have gone without any increase whatsoever, or so de minimis it doesn't reflect what their expenses are. The bill changes that, and it also gives a tax break to working seniors. And again, you know this because we know how your program has documented this in the past. You know that for many seniors, they continue to work out of necessity, and still others because it's part of their purposeful existence. So again, back in 1983, they didn't index the program, so that if you're a single person and make more than $24,000, your Social Security is taxed. If you're a married couple and making just more than $32,000, your Social Security is taxed. So we lift that to $50,000 per individual 100,000 per married couple, and then indexed it. And more than 12 million Americans will get an immediate tax break because of that.
Well, I think that's another powerful selling point. And again, we're talking with Representative John Larson about the Social Security 2100 Act. And I think it's an important point that people need to understand about the way the cost of living increase is calculated. I know
Sure.
people on Social Security, dependent on Social Security, who are very anxious to hear that calculation every year because it affects their ability to make ends meet. And this really says we've had a fair amount of years where that calculation, as you said, hasn't led to any increase at all. But those specific items, the kinds of things you listed, that older people or disabled people depend on, things like price of heating oil, things like medical care, things like cost of public transportation, let's say, maybe is one example, that that particular basket of goods and services that older people use more often means the cost of living for those people on Social Security actually has gone up significantly, so they're losing out, and your improved
Exactly
calculation.
right.
Yeah, so you would correct that. And so
Yes.
so
Well, I think there's, Richard, I think there's also a very important fact, and I think facts and information are important, especially in this day and age. But the Fed in 2018, in fact, late November, early December of last year, came out with a report. Here's what the report said. 90% of all Americans have not recovered their wealth and assets from the Great Recession of 2008. 90%. So imagine if you were 55 back then and are in line to get on to Social Security, no matter what particular age you were, you haven't recovered your wealth and assets from that period of time. During that same time, Social Security never missed a payment.
right.
And as you know, Social Security is more than just a pension benefit. It's also spousal and dependent coverage, a death benefit, and of course disability that so many, 1 in 5 Americans are dependent on who are below the age of 62. So we think that this guarantee, the genius of Roosevelt, and I like to always underscore that in 2008, when everybody's 401k became a 101k, Social Security never missed a payment. And it's that guarantee, it's that certainty that makes Social Security the nation's #1 insurance plan, but also the nation's #1 anti-poverty plan. And what we don't mention enough, the nation's #1 economic development plan. Who hoards their Social Security checks?
Right.
They spend it right back into the economy. And how do we know this? Well, just in every congressional district, on average, there are about 125,000 Social Security recipients in every congressional district. Imagine if you were to do nothing or allow for the cuts that some Republicans are proposing, what that would do to both diminish the economy, create poverty where it doesn't need to exist, when for 50 cents a week for someone who's making $50,000 a year, we can fix this program and make it sustainably solvent and increase the benefits and do it by phasing it in over time, much like indexing would have done had they initiated it in 1983.
Well, I couldn't put the case nearly as well myself, so I have nothing to add to that. But what I would like to talk about, if you have a little more time, Representative John Larson, is the political road ahead. Because I think that's important. So, all right, let's talk about that a little bit. Everything you say about what this bill will do makes so much sense to me on two fundamental levels. One, as policy, I mean, the numbers work, the need is there, the need is addressed. And politically, it makes absolute sense to me because the polls show overwhelming support among the public for Social Security. And I think back to even to a survey that was done on the specific issue of whether Americans would be willing to pay a little bit more each week.
Exactly.
I think it was National Academy of Social Insurance did that. People strongly felt they were willing to do that. But I have to say, here's the other piece of this that fascinates me as a political observer. And you're a strong, solid Democrat. I don't think of you as being on the radical left fringe of the Democratic Party. By the way, I say that as a card-carrying member of the radical left fringe, so don't get me wrong. But I think of you as a solid mainstream Democrat, and you've gotten now. I may have lost count somewhere along the way, but of the 218 Democrats in Congress, is that right? I think you've got something like 206 or 209 signed on as co-sponsors to this bill. Are my numbers about right?
Right. Well, it's actually 211. There's actually 218 is the number required to pass a bill.
Okay.
211 original co-sponsors, 222 who say they will support and vote for the bill, and there's 236 current Democrats. So we feel very confident that we're going to be able to pass the bill. But to your point, we continue to reach out to the other side because it'll be a much stronger bill. And it's not that they disagree with any of the enhancements that we've laid out and would argue, yes, they started out first by saying it's an entitlement plan and it has to be reformed. And we've done a very good job of pushing back. I say we, all the various groups that support and the grassroots movement that we have. I mean, we introduced this bill 7 years ago. But with the Republicans in control, they wouldn't even have a public hearing on it. And that's with a number of them who like the bill, but their leadership finds Social Security as an anathema because what they've said is, that huge tax cut that they provided everybody, 83% of which went to the nation's wealthiest 1%, that was a $2 trillion debt then foisted upon America's back. They said the way they're going to pay for that is through entitlement reform. And they were pretty bold about it, saying, and entitlements are Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. But as all Americans know, Social Security is not an entitlement, nor is Medicare. Social Security is an earned benefit that people paid for. And so it's particularly galling, as you pointed out in the polling data, when people are willing to pay a little bit more because they want that guarantee. They want the certainty. Who doesn't want certainty? When you talk to any businessman, any entrepreneur, anyone, the thing that they will tell you that they want most is the certainty of knowing that there's a guarantee that it will be there. And that's what Social Security has always provided. And so John Lewis is right that this is not only a civil rights movement in terms of the disparity that exists, but it's also standing up for and making sure that a program that you paid into where Congress has actuary responsibility, that they make it sustainably solvent. And we can do that with a minor adjustment. Republicans like, well, the benefits, they just don't want to pay for it. What they've said is that they want to make cuts. And they would do that by either letting the clock run out on Social Security, which is, Richard, if we do nothing by 2035, there's a 20% across the board cut to Social Security. And any age increase to Social Security is a 7% cut. You tell people who are barely making it now, and the more than 5 million current people who are living below poverty on Social Security, that we're going to cut their benefits by 7% and increase the age, or let it lapse and have a a catastrophic occurrence of most of the nation then receiving below poverty level. For those ideological people who want to see an end to the program, that has been a long time goal, to say that it's not sustainably solvent and that it's going bankrupt. And if they do nothing, oh well, yes, that will be the case. But the American people should know that it's Congress's responsibility, it's actuarial responsibility to make sure that the program is sustainably solvent. So let's vote on it. And that's what we intend to do, to make sure that they understand that there will be a vote. And I think that we're going to have a number of Republicans who previously haven't signed on say, well, wait a minute, we were hoping to work together, et cetera, and we welcome any of their proposals.
Well,
but to date, we haven't seen any.
Yeah, interesting. And again, we're talking with Representative John Larson about the Social Security 2100 Act. And just only a couple things I would add to that, if you would allow me, Representative Larson. One is, not only is the word entitlement, I think, deliberately chosen because it's taken on this air of, oh, she or he thinks he's so entitled, acts so entitled. So they use it for negative psychology. But reform is also not the right word when you're talking about blowing something up. It just bugs me when these guys say, oh, we're going to reform Social Security. Oh, you mean you're going to gut and destroy it? Let's talk about what you really are. But the other thing I wanted to talk about was the word Republican here, because in this case, it's what you're talking about Republican elected officials. But when I look at the polling numbers, Republican voters.
Oh, Republican voters in general, whether you're Republican, independent, listen, this is America's plan, and I think that's what is the most galling about this, Richard. This is America's plan, and you're right, across the board, Democrats, Republicans, independents, Social Security is uniquely America's program. And so, and you make a great point here. Daniel Patrick Moynihan used to say the Republicans are very clever at doing something he called, and I always thought the phrase was rather appropriate. He says they use semantic infiltration. And so when you say entitlement reform, that's code for it's a welfare payment, and reform means cut. And it's subtle, but it's a way to say, oh, really, what we need is people to be able to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps, and we don't need this. But when you say, wait a minute, this is the insurance we paid for, it's an earned benefit, they backpedal. They haven't called it an entitlement much anymore. Then they shifted to saying, well, you're hurting millennials, but as you know, millennials are more in need of Social Security than, in fact, baby boomers will be, and in large part because of the unbelievable amount of college loan debt that they've incurred, the fact that most of them will probably not earn the same kind of salaries that their parents earn, the fact that they also are finding it more difficult to purchase homes and finance homes given their salaries, and the fact that they live in a gig economy, which makes Social Security all the more necessary for them, because they probably more so than baby boomers, 10,000 a day who become eligible for Social Security, are going to need the certainty of this program and the guarantee that Social Security offers.
Absolutely. And speaking of millennials, the other thing that always strikes me about these quote-unquote reform proposals that get floated around this town of Washington, D.C. is they always talk about how they're doing it for millennials, but it seems to me it's always millennials that wind up getting the short end in these proposals. It's always, we're going to phase this out, we're going to phase that out, we'll protect today's seniors and soon-to-be seniors, but by the time millennials hit retirement age, whether it's changing that cost of living adjustment or whatever, it's them that's going to wind up on the short end of the stick.
No question about it, Richard. And, it sounds, they can try to make it sound good. Well, we want to make sure that people have more money in their paycheck so that they'll be able to do these things. what they don't tell them is that the money that's already been taken out, when you add just a small amount to that, how that gives them the guarantee, how that gives them the extra benefit, how that provides for a disability that they probably can't afford either, what it means in terms of a premature death of a spouse, how do you take care of your dependent children. 3 members of the Ways and Means Committee currently, and 2 Republicans, both, lost their fathers prematurely, and their mothers raised them on Social Security. And the same is true for Rich Neal, the chairman of the committee, lost both his mother and father, and was raised by his grandparents, as is the case of many people in society today. So we know how critically important this is to the American people, and all the polling data supports it. So we're going to put it to the test. We're going to have a markup when we get back of this bill. We've had 5 public hearings where for the last 7 years we had none. And not even a public hearing. And now we'll have a vote in the committee, and the bill will pass, and then we'll have a vote on the House floor, and it will pass. And then there's going to be, I think, it's going to be shows like yours, but it's also going to be the number of groups that are supporting this bill all across the country that are going to rise up and demand of the Senate that Mitch McConnell at least put it to a vote. And oh, by the way, if you got a better plan, put it out there.
Right. And, okay, so I got a couple numbers wrong earlier on, and I used to work, you'll understand this even if the audience doesn't, I used to work for Hank Greenberg at AIG, so getting numbers wrong, meanest boss in America, he was on the cover of Fortune one month, but brilliant guy, and you didn't get numbers wrong with Hank Greenberg. And so I want to make sure I got my numbers right on all of this before I let you go, if you will.
Sure.
Number one is, I said earlier that 99.6% of the public, in my understanding, would see only a minimal increase. Now, for the remaining 0.4%, less than 1 in 200, the wealthiest, the payroll tax cap is lifted, right? So they will, the wealthy will pay something more like their fair share as part of this, right?
That's correct. We create what some would call a donut hole, but as you know, when we first introduced this bill, the cap on Social Security was $112,000.
Right.
Today it's $132,900. That will continue to grow, but what we lift the cap on is people earning over $400,000. Everywhere I go, I ask people in the audience to raise their hand if they're making over $400,000. Well, because only 0.6% of the nation, as you point out, does. I haven't been in an audience yet where anyone's raised their hand that's making over $400,000. So, but they do pay proportionately what a guy making $50,000 would, and that's fair. And that's enough of what we need to deal with the 10,000 baby boomers a day that are becoming eligible for Social Security. So that's why that's in there. And by, I believe it's 2054, each year that cap will continue to grow with regard to Social Security. And so, it will reach there at one particular point. I believe it's 1254.
And that's an important point too, because it hasn't been growing, right? So, or it's been growing far less than it should. So, okay, so and you've got, let me see if I got your revised numbers correctly. You now have 211 co-sponsors, maybe you always did.
Yes.
It takes 218 for a bill to pass. There are 236 Democrats in the House. You'd like to get some Republicans. If you can, you think that's quite possible. So it sounds to me like this bill has a very good chance of passing and going up to the Senate, right?
No question about it. And, I'm always hesitant to guarantee because that's just the skeptical nature of a person who's been in government for a long time. But this is as close to it will pass the House of Representatives, and I am so pleased with the leadership of Rich Neal, the chairman, and Nancy Pelosi, our Speaker, We went through regular order, meaning we held all the hearings on this and have provided ample time for people to come up with their solutions or give us their alternatives. And, our colleagues have talked about how much they like it and how they would change this, but they've talked mostly in platitudes and not in any specifics. So we'll await that. We hope that they do, but whether they do or not, we're going forward, and there will be a vote on this bill. And all of the groups, including, Social Security Works, the National Committee to Preserve, the AFL-CIO, Paralyzed Veterans of America, the American Federation of Government Employees, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, Latinos for Secure Retirement, NOW, SAGE, the NEA, ARC of the United States, International Federation of Professional Teachers, Consortium of Citizens with Disabilities, Justice and Aging, Association of University Centers, the Senior Citizens League, the National Organization of Social Security Claimants, to name a few, are the groups that are supporting us. And that's what will be the driving force. It's actually shows like yours where the message gets out and it goes across the country, and seniors get to say to their representatives, both in the House and in the Senate, why aren't you taking this up? We need you to vote on this. What a remarkable thing to do. Actually vote in a democracy. Actually vote on issues that have direct impact and provide solutions for the American people, and one that's desperately needed by so many of our seniors and so many people who are coming through the process now and who will be of age in an increasing number over the next 10 years.
Well, I think what you're doing is terrific. I thank you for, on behalf of everyone I'm entitled to speak for, which I think is just my immediate family, and they may vote me out too. But I do thank you for your hard work, Representative John Larson of the 1st Congressional District in Connecticut. The bill is the Social Security 2100 Act. I encourage all our listeners to follow its progress closely. And Representative Larson, thanks so much for coming on the program.
An honor to be here, Richard. Thank you.